FA figures have revealed that despite football's year of financial restraint, due to coronavirus, of course, everything's due to the pandemic, Premier League fees paid out to agents and intermediaries has risen. It's risen, totalling over £250 million. When you break it down, this is what the top clubs paid to agents and intermediaries. Chelsea at the top, 35 million. In there, we've got Manchester United, 29 million. Manchester City, 30 million. Liverpool, 21 million. I mean, it is utterly incredible at this particular time. So, in a year, and you break it down, Newcastle, 11 million. Even Sheffield United, 7. In a year where football, Simon's been calling on the government to use taxpayers' money to bail the industry out.
Sure.
This is an insult, isn't it?
Look, it's a difficult one to odds because the numbers are so significant and they're not comparable with the idea that football needs to take a haircut and a reset and whatever else. But if you look at them in isolation and you say, well, Chelsea have spent £250 million on players, best part of, right? So it's not surprising if you take the law of what the agents are getting paid currently in and around the 10 to 15% mark, that you find £35 million worth of intermediary fees.
In amongst all that, will they get Havertz, Werner, Chilwell, Ziyech,
But if
Mendy?
you look at it and say, well, 35 million into 250 million is about 12.5%, 13%, isn't it? So you're kind of in the area. It's unacceptable, by the way, that it's at 13%, because I don't know quite how we got into the territory where it's a given that agents get 10%, because in no other walk of life do they get that sort of revenue. But by the same token, you will also look at this, and a lot of this will be when businesses are in distress, right? You find that costs go in a different direction in terms of, we need to get rid of this player. Can you help us move him along and we'll pay you a fee? So all of a sudden, out of the culture of clubs needing to cut their cloth a little bit, out of the culture of clubs needing to be able to redirect players into different contracts or move them out of the club, agents will be able to profit in the misery of the financial circumstances that clubs in the world has found itself in.
Scandalous.
Well, it is scandalous, but if no one's prepared to do anything about it... I remember years and years ago, David Gill publishing a report when he was the executive vice chairman of Manchester United, talking about Manchester United spending £7 or £8 million on agents' fees, which at that time, 15 years ago, was a significant amount of money. And I thought to myself, I wonder if indeed your salary was indexed to how much you paid agents' fees, how quickly you'd be prepared to reduce agents' fees. Because they factor this thinking into the blueprint of how football is run, and no one wants to take on these agents. You get people like Mino Raiola that come on, have their say, you question them, they get all offended.
Well, he wouldn't come on this morning because he knows you're on with me.
I'm sure he wouldn't, right? Because he doesn't like the fact that people ask him difficult questions. If he's talking to people that won't ask him a question, he'll be all up front and all, be able to tell us what his views on things are. But this has to come from football itself. We can sit here outraged by the fact that football is prepared. If you index transfer spends, if you index transfer spends typically to, agents' fees to transfer spends, then on a £1.2 billion spend, you'd have expected the agents' fees to be 120 million. Because 10% of the transfer fees. This is at 25%. So this is a whole new landscape.
But Simon, it's the times in which we are living. We have seen in the last 12 months and more, football has literally hounded the government to use our money, taxpayers' money, to bail the industry out.
But not necessarily the Premier League. The Premier League hasn't done that.
Well,
the Premier League
it has.
How's it done that?
The Premier League told the government to help the EFL.
Yeah, but that's the EFL. The EFL and the Premier League are two different entities.
And the government pushed back.
But the EFL and the Premier League are two different entities. They have different responsibilities.
Simon, come on.
But also
the government pushed back and said to the Premier League,
we sat on this show, right, and we will sit here and go, when is Pierre going to sign his contract at Arsenal? When is Aubameyang going to sign his contract? We have to watch the egg timer while we're all talking about he's getting £350,000 a week. I didn't see the outrage from the people saying, hang on a second,
Simon.
How's he getting? Because this is the byproduct of this industry.
We're all jaw-dropped about the money these players earn. Of course we are. We talk about it every day. If we spoke about it every time we want to speak about it, it would become boring.
But we're not.
But here we have agents
accepted.
And intermediaries taking money like this at a time. The key thing is the time in which we're living.
They're not taking it, Jim. They're being given it. They're not taking it. No one is putting a shotgun to someone's head and saying, you must pay these agents this. This is what the football world is prepared to pay agents. And unless they're going to get hold of this and then we have to watch the Premier League. This is where the outrage kicks
Listen,
in.
if you'd been at the top of Palace,
and
if you'd been within the Premier League,
I had all this, Jim.
In recent times, would you have said, no, we have a duty to bail out the EFL? They didn't.
No.
So you would have pushed to bail out the EFL, would you?
No, I believe that the Premier League should have cut its cloth accordingly, and that the responsibility for the EFL should have been a football situation that could have come from players being supportive of their own members and their own colleagues. That wasn't available to them because the Premier League players wouldn't even consider a pay cut.
But this is what is the insult in all of this, Simon. People out there this morning listening to us on talkSPORT, at the same time as the Premier League say they can't afford to bail out the EFL, they fork out £250 million for agents and intermediaries.
But they also fork out £300 million a year on wages to their players at Manchester United. They also fork out £300 million a year wages to the Chelsea players. They also fork out £300 million a year wages to the Man City players, right? The whole thing is skewed. Well, the whole thing is an egregious abuse of finances.
Put it this way, when the Premier League said that they couldn't afford to bail out the EFL, that was a lie.
Well, no, because the business model that they have...
How was it not?
Well, because their business model would have always included that they were going to continue to purchase players to be able to perpetuate the success of their club. They were going to be able to have to pay agents. So their business model would have said, we are going to fund agents, we're going to fund players, right? But we can't also then fund something that's really got nothing to do with us. We are the root cause of this evil. The reasons why the finances outside of the Premier League are busted is because of the drip-down effect of wages. But actually, contractually, we've got no obligation to the EFL. Morally, we might have, but we don't live in a particularly moral world, do we, at times?
So where do we go with it?
Regulate them.
So how do we stop this happening again?
Regulate them. But you've got this nonsense where the agents have been empowered to such a level that they actually think they're the game. They think they're the game. Mino Raiola will tell you that there's no way that potentially he's going to go to Man City because he doesn't like Pep Guardiola and he can't have a relationship with Pep Guardiola because once upon a time Pep Guardiola had a problem with one of his players. Unless you're going to put these guys in their box and concentrate their mind that actually they are a cog, they're not the wheel, they're part of the mechanisms. They're an unnecessary evil at sometimes to perhaps serve a greater good every now and again. I've seen the evil, not so much of the good. If you're going to get control over them, and if they don't like it, then tell them to go and represent another industry. It's really simple. FIFA grow a set of balls and regulate these people. Regulate the amount they can earn. They'll push back and say it's salary cap and constraints and restraints of trade and whatever else. Have a great big dirty smelly ugly fight and put these people back in their box.
Smelly and ugly fight.
Well, whatever it is, because they'll recognise that trait because most of them fall into that category. Certainly Mino, anyway.
I just want to finish with this with you. Is it not an insult? Is it not almost immoral that they spend £250 million on agents and intermediaries fees, and yet some of the clubs on this list use the furlough scheme, taxpayers' money, to pay the staff?
Not true. Here's what they did.
What do you mean not true?
Here's what they did. Tottenham and Liverpool suggested they wanted to use the furlough scheme. And why? Because they wanted their players to take a pay cut because they knew they were going to lose 120 million quid in revenue. So they wanted, and the players went, go forth and multiply. We're not taking one single penny. The only club that I believe that took any sort of concession were Arsenal, with their highest player, Mesut Ozil, refusing to do it. So the actual reality of it was that Tottenham and Liverpool took the furlough scheme because Daniel Levy was being clever about trying to leverage players into the guilt complex of being able to take a pay cut so that they could manage the situation they were finding themselves in. And that might then have given the Premier League, who were losing billions, by the way, the opportunity to fund the EFL.
Simon, there was an ITV investigation just last week into who used it. Well, this is what we know. Listen, this is what we know. Newcastle, Sheffield United and Leeds. All clubs who utilised the government's furlough scheme.
Leeds were in the EFL, weren't they?
So, to pay employees during the pandemic at some point in the last year.
To pay the employees that because they've got, every other business can bend and flex, right? It can turn off its advertising, it can turn off its costs, it can defer certain things, it can restructure its business. The only business in the world that cannot restructure is sport, because all of the money is fixed into one area, player salaries. And if you can't do anything with player salaries because they will not move, what are you going to do? You can actually flex the guys in the club shop, the guys that are working in marketing, because they form a different contractual. They're not fixed, and they haven't got some union going, no way are we taking a pay cut, everybody out.
What an industry it is. How can Arsenal, who made members of their staff redundant, earlier on in the pandemic,
Yep.
pay agents and intermediaries $16.5 million.
Because it's in their business model, because they have an obligation. And now we don't. Also, bear in mind, right, and you know me, Jim. The last thing I'm going to defend is profligacy in football and agents getting paid too much money. But we don't know when these agents' fees fell due, because they might be a part of deals that were done 18 months ago and have a drag-on effect. We also don't know what people got in return for that money. We also don't know how much of this was factored into their business model, because ultimately, if you've got stadium tours and conference and banqueting in a stadium that can't be open for a year, why would you have those staff? Oh, out of goodwill. If we weren't broadcasting, how many, and this was shut down, how many presenters would be sitting around getting paid by talkSPORT? Nobody would, because if there's no broadcasting criteria, you wouldn't have people getting paid, would you? What we're asking for is some form of downward effect on the reality that football clubs are paying these agents far too much money. But at the same token, we're part of the problem, because the fans are screaming for players to get paid more money, to sign the biggest player in the world. What do you think Erling Haaland's going to get? That slob is going to get him moved somewhere and get paid 25 million quid for it.
How can he be a slob? You don't even know him.
I know him well enough to know that he
The
is.
government was right. The government was right to say to the Premier League, you sort out the poor old EFL.
No.
You've got a ton of money. You sort it
but
out.
you're not listening.
You pushed Oliver Dowden on this.
No, I pushed full stop on the fact that there was an inherent responsibility for the Premier League to do something about its own cost base, and when it could save something on its own cost base, to give it back to the EFL.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. You're just saying it in a flowery way.
But it went to the players and said the only way we can get some money, because it's not the responsibility of John Henry to write a cheque out for Accrington Stanley. John Henry's losing 100 million quid at Liverpool, 100 odd million quid at Boston Red Sox. He's got to find, despite the fact he's a billionaire, the argument would be, you're a billionaire, just pony up. Pony up for a bunch of people that you don't know.
Well, John Henry could afford to pay 21.5 million to agents.
Because it was built into the business model of either disposing of players or acquiring players.
I see your business model,
Jim.
and
if you're Coca-Cola, right? If you're Greggs, right? Greggs took a furlough. Did Greggs stop advertising on television? Greggs and people like Costa Coffee, people that made billions.
You're
and
defending
billions.
the men at the top of the
No,
clubs.
I'm not. I'm saying
because
to you,
you were one.
football clubs don't make any money as a rule, right? So we've got all these businesses out there like Costa Coffee that make billions of pounds per year. They furloughed all their staff, but they didn't stop advertising on television, did they? Part of advertising is buying players. Part of being fit for purpose to be able to
Business
achieve.
model. That's it. Oh, that was your contract. Sorry. It's 11:15.